want to start a new message series, and before I do that, I want to acknowledge the virus that we've been dealing with now for 3/4 of a year that's affected all of our lives. Uh, the virus is a tremendous analogy of our relationship with God. See, God is a relational being. He created us to live in relationship with Him. The model of that is the Trinity: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They live in perfect relationship together. And then God said, "I want to create human beings, and I want to have a relationship with them that is as intimate and beautiful as the relationship I have within the Trinity." If you ask the question, why do I exist? Why am I here? Why did God put me here? It's because God loves relationship, and He wants to have a relationship with you and with me. So now, what does a virus do? A virus separates, it alienates, it isolates, it distances us. We wear masks. We can't really see each other the way we're used to seeing each other. It's an amazing analogy of what happened between our relationship with God and what a virus does to us as human beings, as a community, and as a society, and as a culture. It separates, it alienates, it isolates. So here, we're going to look at a book by the name of Galatians, which is a beautiful example of how God restores and reconciles that which is broken. We live in a broken world with real problems. We're real lives, but we have a real God. And that God says, "I want to restore you. I want to restore your world and bring you back into relationship with me." So if you're dealing with this virus or the world around us and you're scared or confused or afraid, this book is for you. So I believe that Galatians can make a difference in your life and in my life, especially in the times that we're living in right now. So the first question is, why study Galatians? And one of the answers is that Galatians is the clearest expression of the history of salvation that we have in the Bible. It's often been asked, if you were stranded on a desert island and you could only pick one book for the rest of your life to have on that desert island, one of the 66 books of the Bible, which book would you choose? And I would suggest to you that you would choose the book of Galatians, because Galatians is the consolidation of the book of Romans, which is the treatise that Paul gives tracing the history of salvation from Genesis all the way through Revelation. So he takes Romans as his great treatise, and then he condenses that down into 6 hard-hitting chapters in Galatians, which is the key to understanding all else of the Bible. What we're saying is this, that God acts in history, and then God interprets that action in history. He doesn't ask us, so I did something in history, my son died on the cross. Now, how do you feel about that? Or what is your interpretation of that? No, God doesn't do that. God says, I act in history, and then I interpret that which I have done in history. For instance, we have the Gospels, which are the Acts of Jesus Christ and John the Baptist, and we have the book of the Acts of the Apostles. God is acting. Then he takes the rest of the New Testament, the epistles, and he interprets and explains his actions in a way in which we can understand for ourselves, our faith, our lives, and our future. And I'm making the case that in all of that explanation, Paul is using Galatians to say, if you really want to get it all, master this book. It's the roadmap of Christianity. Just 6 short chapters, and in it is everything you need to know to get to where you want to go, and to understand all the fullness of God's riches and his blessings for us as human beings. I believe that if you master Galatians, if you master these 6 chapters, I believe that you will have the key to unlock the treasure chest to the rest of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. It's called the Magna Carta of belief. It's all about the basic issue of how is one saved and how is one sanctified and ultimately glorified with God in heaven. It is the key to unlock all of the Bible. Luther's great work in 1535 was on his 2-volume work on the book of Galatians. It was the book that that set all Europe on fire with Reformation. And Luther said when he would teach Galatians, he would say, let him who understands Galatians and the distinctions between law and gospel, law and grace, let that person who understands that sit at the head of the table and call that person a doctor of Holy Scriptures. Doctor of Holy Scriptures. You know, when I was in seminary, one of my professors said to me, Stu, you can... there's several ways you can read a book. You can skim it, you can read it, you can learn it, and you can master it. Skim, read, learn, master. And I'm challenging all of us in this series to master in 6 short chapters this book of Galatians. I had another professor in seminary tell me when he would ask us to write these long essays, he would say, now, when you write this essay, I'm not really concerned about what you think or what you feel. I'm not worried about your conclusions. I really don't need to hear those because, quite frankly, you're not smart enough for me to care what you have to say. When you write an essay for me, I want you to write about what other people have said about the topic. I want you to master the great minds of Christianity and tell me what they have to say. And maybe when you're done with all of that and mastering their understanding and their minds, maybe you can have some thoughts of your own that I might be interested in hearing. And I used to love to hear him say that several times throughout the course of a semester. So we're not so concerned here about what we think or how we interpret things. We want to know what God thinks. We want to know the mind of God. We want to study God's ideas. And so we're going to take a look at what I believe to be the greatest mind of Christianity, a man who was born to be great, as we study this book of Galatians. Well, there's a second reason why we study Galatians. Not only does it give us a close look at the history of our faith and what we believe, but secondly, it gives us a close look at one of the greatest minds of all of Christianity, a man born for greatness. Galatians begins, chapter 1, verse 1, Paulos Apostolos. He's in an angry mood and he wants to explain who he is. And so first he uses his Greek name. Now, Paul had 3 names and 1 title. The first name is Paulos. It's his Greek name. Paul is a Hellenist. A Hellenist is one who follows the way of Greece. Hellen it really means Elos. Elos. It's not the name of a woman, it's Elos, an Elosist, a Hellenist. It's someone who resurrects and revives the teachings of ancient Greece and the Greek philosophers. The classical period of Greek history was from 600 to 300 BC. And in that time, it was the height of the Greek culture. They influenced art, literature, music, theater, architecture, sculpture, music, math, science. You name it. The Greeks had it. They were enormous thinkers. They had ideas about things. They loved to understand how things worked. And so the Hellenists are the revival of the ancient Greek study and understanding between 600 to 300. The way we got to Paul in his time period was through Philip of Macedonia. If you'll remember that Philip defeated Greece in Athens in 338 BC. And when he did that, his son, later, Alexander the Great, came along and conquered the whole known world. At that time, Persia, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. He just conquered that whole region. And when he conquered that whole region, Alexander the Great brought in to that region the Hellenistic philosophy, music, art, literature, architecture. He brought all of that into those areas. He was a Hellenist. In fact, Alexander the Great studied under Aristotle. He was well-schooled in classical Greek thought. It's called the Age of Colonization, in which Alexander the Great colonized the whole world in the culture of the ancient Greeks. And that lasted until his death in 332. And then, of course, the Romans came in with the rise of the Roman Empire in 31 BC, which is the time we find Paul living in and the time that we find Jesus living in. Now, in terms of Paul being a Hellenist, we find a very interesting passage in Acts 21, verse 39. Listen to how Paul explains himself as he's giving a defense of himself. He writes, Paul answered, I am a Jew, which he was. I am from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. That is, a citizen of a great city. Tarsus. Well, we all know where Tarsus is. It's in Cilicia, in Asia Minor, in Turkey to be exact. Tarsus was the capital of that Roman district and province of Cilicia in Turkey. It was a fortified city. It's where the major trade routes crossed each other between Syria and Asia Minor. It had a huge, fertile coastland. It was just a plush, beautiful place. It was known as the seat of classic Greek Hellenistic culture. In fact, Alexander founded one of the first universities in the history of the world there. It was a great university. It was known as rivaling the universities and the study in Athens in Greece for knowledge. It was surpassed in many ways every other ancient university of the time. But not only that, but Tarsus was a seat of luxury and wealth and prosperity, and it was known for its fine linens of flax, and it was known for its tent making. Now, let's just pause here for a second about this tent making thing that we see taking place here, because you're aware that later on in his life, Paul refers to himself as a tent maker. So what does that mean? Well, Tarsus was the capital city of tent making in the ancient world, but not your camper tents. This isn't L.L. Bean tents that you go and spend a weekend camping out in a sleeping bag in a tent. No, these were the tents that you'd see like in the movie Lawrence of Arabia. They were plush tents. They were homes that people lived in. They had Persian rugs on the floor. They were veritable palaces made out of linen and woven fabrics and textiles. The beauty of them was unsurpassed. Well, they were made in Tarsus, in Arabia. So Paul's living there, and all of this knowledge and wealth and luxury. And as he's doing that, it was said of him, because of his knowledge of the Hellenistic world and his study of the Hellenistic world, scholars say that he was obviously, was one of the greatest writers of all times, if not the most well-read writer of all times, and certainly of all Greek literature of that period. It is said of him that he is unsurpassed in his magnitude of knowledge. It is said of him that had he not been converted, that he would have surpassed Plato and Aristotle and the breadth and the genius of his mind. Now, I don't know if he was at that level or not, but we can say this. He was a genius when it came to a Greek understanding of philosophy and of the explanation of life. Paulos, the Hellenist, the Greek. Now, Paul has a second name. Not only does he have a Greek name, Paulos, he has a Roman name, Paulus. He is a citizen of the Roman Empire. You know, there were three great civilizations in the ancient world. There were the Babylonians around the 1700 BC. There was the Greeks of 600 to 300. And then there came the Romans. Octavian, after he consolidated the empire together, named Augustus the Strong, united the whole empire. It was called the Golden Age of Rome. And Paul is a citizen of Rome at the height of its civilization. He writes when he is arrested, and the Romans want to flog him. A centurion asks him, "Are you a Roman citizen?" Because Roman citizens had special and unique gifts and rights within that civilization. And Paul said, when he was asked, "Are you a Roman citizen?" he said, the commander went to Paul and asked, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And Paul replied, "Yes, I am." He appeals to his Roman citizenship for a fair public trial. He can't be executed. He has rights within the land of Rome. He's different from all the people that don't have that special key of Roman citizenship. Now, question, how could you prove, or how did people know that you actually had Roman citizenship? Well, they tell us that they had little tablets that they carried around with them, little rocks with their name and the place where they were registered for their citizenship. So if someone challenged you, you would show them your stone, Paulos Tarsus. That's where I'm from. And you say, well, I could make up a stone like that myself or carve a little tablet like that myself. How did we protect them? Well, there was a means by which you could be executed, and that was by pretending or faking your Roman citizenship. So when Paul said, I'm Paulos from Tarsus, he could be checked out. He might put you in jail. He might send somebody to Tarsus, might look in the big building where all the little stone tablets are kept, and they'd look up and they'd say, oh yeah, there is Paul from Paulos from Tarsus. Yes, he is a Roman citizen. Come back to where you were, and they'd free you. Don't lose the rock. So Paul's a Roman citizen. He's registered in Tarsus. This is significant. He's got a Hellenistic background and fluent in Greek, and he's a Roman citizen and fluent in Latin and has all the rights of Roman citizenship. So now, one other question, since he's a Roman citizen, how did he, who already said that he was a Jew by birth, become a Roman citizen? Well, we think we get a clue when Paul refers to himself as being a tent maker. Now, remember what was made in Tarsus, not camping tents, but these plush, veritable moving palaces. And there were times when the Romans would permit non-Romans to become citizens if they made some significant, enormous impact or gift to the empire. If they did something of outstanding quality and service that was recognized by Rome as of such value that this person could become a Roman citizen. And so here's Paul coming from a wealthy family, we believe, of fine linens, skilled in the art of tent making. So there he is, a Roman citizen. He tells us later in Galatians 4:5 that this was the fullness of time. It was the first time in the history of the world through the Roman Empire. They weren't great thinkers like the Greeks, but they were great warriors and fighters and conquerors. And it was the first time that the whole world was united under one emperor, under one government, under one language, under one law, under one currency, under one system of transportation where roads networked the whole Roman Empire. It was an amazing time for an individual to be born in, especially one born to live in greatness. So Paul has a Greek name, Paulos. He has a Roman name, Paulos, and he has one other. Paul's third name is his Hebrew name, Saul. Isn't it interesting that he is named after the first king of Israel, Saul? And Paul's going to make the claim that he becomes the Hebrew of the Hebrews. On his defense on the stairs of the Antonian fortress when he is attacked by the Jews, he writes these words in Acts 22, verse 3. He writes again, and he reiterates what he's already said in Acts 21:39. He reiterates, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, a Hellenistic Jew. But I was brought up in this city of Jerusalem as well. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison. Oh, so Paul says, yeah, I'm a devout Jew, a Hellenistic Jew from Tarsus, but at an age, because of my brilliance and my understanding of the Greek culture, my family had me brought here to Jerusalem to study under the great Gamaliel. Now, who was Gamaliel? Gamaliel was the Jewish scholar and head of the whole Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was made up of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He was the ultimate ruler in Israel, Gamaliel. And guess what? Paul, this Hellenistic Jew, is brought to Jerusalem to study under him, under Gamaliel. And he is to learn Orthodox Judaism. And not only does he learn it, and does he become one of the most outstanding teachers and students of Orthodox Judaism, but when it comes time to persecute this thing called the Way, which is what early Christians were called. They were called followers of the Way. They saw Jesus' teaching as the Way to some people. And so he says, I was called to persecute the followers of the Way. I was handpicked out of all of the Jewish scholars and of the day, and the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I was handpicked to be persecutors of this Way. I was thoroughly prepared for that because I was schooled in the law of Moses. You know, there were three laws and forms of law in ancient Israel. There was the law of the Ten Commandments of Moses. Then there was the oral law, because they didn't have a lot of tablets to write on or papyrus to write on. The people, when they would go to the synagogues and listen and learn, they had developed tremendous memories to memorize things, and they developed oral laws that came out of the Ten Commandments. And if that were not enough, then the Pharisees and the Sadducees developed 613 extra ceremonial laws to tack onto the laws of Moses. So now we've got all of these laws taking place. Dietary laws, laws about the Sabbath, about how far you could travel, outward obedience. We had all these different kinds of laws by the time of Jesus, and certainly by the time of Paul, which Jesus taught the people were incorrect, that they were not bound by these ceremonial laws. So Paul sees the followers of the Way, and they're deserting all of the laws except for the Ten Commandments of Moses, which we're going to talk about in several weeks. But they've done away with the ceremonial laws, as Jesus did away with the ceremonial laws. And so they need to be persecuted. Now, by persecuting them, he says very succinctly, very cogently, and very clearly here, the way I persecuted them, one, I put them to death. We know he was standing there at the martyrdom of Stephen. He put them to death. This great Christian scholar and man that we read about today, his hands and his clothing were stained with the blood of the followers of the Way. Brutal death, horrifying deaths, horrific deaths. And not only that, but he took men and women and he threw them into prison. What strikes me about that is it wasn't just men, but he threw the women into prison as well. What about their children? If you were a believer at the time of Paul, you were under great persecution. In fact, throughout the last 2,000 years, Christianity has been more under persecution than it's been free to worship. And where it's been free to worship, over time, the church and, in essence, the message of Jesus Christ comes under persecution. Because societies or cultures can't thrive with a belief in God. They want to do away with God. You know, it's man is the measure of all things. We don't need a God in our culture. And by the way, we're moving clearly in that direction today in our culture here in America. That's why I did the series, Our Faith, Our Culture, and Our Future. We're moving into a neo-orthodox, neo-Marxist, socialistic culture, which does away with the need for the God of the Bible. And when you get rid of that God, the only way to do that is, as Marx said, is eliminate the opiate of the people. You need to eliminate those who believe in a living God, who influences our lives here in this world. So Paul's living in that kind of world. He was seen by the followers of the Way as a terrorist, as Adolf Hitler, as Mussolini. They were terrified of him and the powers that he had been given by the Sanhedrin and the leaders of the Jewish people. This is Paul. This is the Paul that we read. So what have we said so far? Well, he's fluent in Greek, he's fluent in Latin, he's fluent in Aramaic, and he's fluent in Hebrew. He's the Hebrew of the Hebrews. Isn't it amazing how God was preparing this one person? He was born to be great. not as a Hellenist, as he might have thought, and as he's prepared to do battle with the Greek minds of the day when he gets to Athens on Mars Hill. He was born to be great, but not as a Hellenist. He was born to be great, but not as a Roman citizen. He was born to be great, but not as the Hebrew of the Hebrews. He was born to be great as a servant of the living God. And God had been carefully preparing him through his mentors, through the influences, through the places where he had lived. God was carefully preparing him for a conversion experience to be this great servant of God. Now, I just want to close by asking you this question, and again, we will talk more about this in the weeks to come. As you look over your life, get a journal out, a pad and a pen, and write down where you've been schooled, where you've lived, who your mentors were, what your influences were, what places did you live in that were thriving with certain cultures. Because you see, all of that is preparing you and me not just for a vocation or even our avocation. It's God's given us all of that to prepare us to be used as servants of the living God. And I would ask you, as we close this message and prepare for the next one, I would ask you, how has God uniquely prepared you? And are you taking that preparation, those influences, and allowing them to be used in your life to advance the kingdom of God with your family, with your friends, and in your local community?